We had the big bankruptcies because people didn't understand the balance sheet. They couldn't understand P&L and how this corresponds to balance sheet and liquidity. So many companies were big conglomerates and huge companies that nobody would guess that would go bust went actually. So this was a big lesson.
Nikos Polymenakos is the Director of Treasury at Delta Foods SA and former Treasury and Credit Manager at Henkel. He specializes in treasury, capital structure, and digital finance transformation, helping organizations turn financial data into strategic decisions and finance teams into business partners.
AI, it's the end of a journey and not the start of a journey. Before simplifying, you have to have accurate data. Nobody can go to the AI if he doesn't have the first layer, which is accurate data. Since everything is in place, you can put AI to make quick and fast decisions, but without all the previous steps, it's like...
Nico, welcome to Treasury Leaders. Nico, can you tell us a little bit about your career? I think you did not start your career in finance, but how did you end up in Treasury?
Jan-Willem, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here with you, and thanks for having me. Well, that's true. My career and my education is not linear, and this is how I end up in Treasury. But if you think retrospectively, it does make sense because I started as a graphic designer. So this was my aim, to be creative and do something outside of, math and very structural things. Life ended up getting to a bank to work, and then everything revealed. But at the end, now as I'm in my 25th, more or less, year of experience in the finance world, I can assure you that, it makes absolutely sense, this journey, because finance is not about maths as most of the people believe. It contains a lot of math, but it's about, behavior. It's about relationships, it's about history, it's about understanding the world and how it operates. So, going from, it's all about humans at the end of the day. So, having a more humanitarian, starting point absolutely makes sense after all these 25 years. But of course, it takes mathematics and understanding structural things to excel in this job.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I think interesting. So by nature, you're quite a creative person. Can you find any of that creativity also in your daily job? Or are you?
Yes, as a matter of fact, yes, this is the, the motivation behind all this noise that, you can create. First of all, you have to understand how business works, which is very creative because humans are creative and they created interesting things. So a business model is very creative and how everything correlates with each other. So you have to get inside this and the mechanics and then build on top of this. So yes, I find creative pieces of all day, all around my area of responsibility.
Yeah, and I think one good example of that, you really try to understand the business, because I think you're one of the few treasurers I know that is, besides the treasurer, is also finance manager for a few of the subsidiaries within Delta Foods. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How do you combine all of that in just a few hours in the day you have?
Judging from this point, I am now, it has to be like this because, a treasury, it's at the heart of the business. Because treasury, it's like legal, and treasurers have to understand everything. They have to understand the market, the customers, they have to understand the value creation and the elements that destroy value also. They have to understand the need of the business. They have to understand many things. So being finance, in my head, it's, another step in the career of a treasurer. Because you are already there in the middle and you see things and you understand how business works.
And how do you deal with that switching of context all the times? Because you have to wear many hats. Like the one day you have to go into one of the subsidiaries and maybe do some finance tasks, and the other day you have to do the treasury stuff. How do you switch between that context on a day-to-day basis?
Well, if you start connecting the dots, it makes absolute sense because you understand the cash is connected the dots in a business. So when you understand that you are the connection in every aspect of business, for example, in my business in fast moving, through cash, you can understand the business drivers, how customers respond. You can understand how the market responds. You can understand what the needs of a new product. You can understand the OPEX and the CAPEX. So it's a necessity to understand the business, and you know the result. You can translate a decision to the result very quickly. And with adding experience on this, it comes by itself that you understand the decision and how they reflect to the cash. Because P&L is very important for a business, for valuation, for stock market, but understanding the balance sheet and eventually the cash, it's what makes puts you to the next day. Because if you don't have cash, or you have trapped cash or trapped liquidity in your balance sheet, you are doomed. You cannot take the opportunities you have, and in the worst case, maybe you go bankrupt just because you cannot understand your balance sheet. So yes, it's difficult, as we already said offline. It's very interesting. You have to be very disciplined to manage your time and change focus within the day, 3 or 4 different priorities. But at the end, this is adding value not only to you as a professional, but to the company too, because you can understand the normal course of business, how business and profit transform to cash, which is very important in a business.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point. Like, we have seen examples in the market where businesses were profitable, but they didn't manage their liquidity well. And as a result, they anyhow went bankrupt. So I think having these two perspectives really helps you understanding the full picture. So that's, I think, a good combination, although, yeah.
Yeah, since I have a responsibility for credit risk also, third-party credit risk, not financial credit risk only, I've seen a lot of cases that growth, they couldn't handle growth, they couldn't finance growth, And the worst case of if you don't grow, you have a problem. If you grow and you don't have fuel in the middle of the journey, it's worse because, you're going to blow up in the air. So understanding the mechanics, what the balance is, what your financial needs, how much can you grow. This is very pivotal for Treasury, but also for the success of the business as a whole.
Yeah. Nico, let's talk a little bit about Greece, because we have seen quite a remarkable growth story and an economic recovery over the past 5 years. And there's even seems to be room for further improvement. What is it like running corporate treasury in Greece? Like, are there any specific things that you see in a Greek company? And I know you also worked for a German corporate. Like, where do you see the differences in the landscape where you're dealing with?
Yeah, first of all, there are cultural differences, in every aspect of life. So cultural differences, they exist also in corporates, So fundamentally, Southern Europe companies have different mentality than North or Central Europe companies, which is normal, it's acceptable, and, it's part of being in Europe, This is a composition of different cultures, different way of doing business eventually. For Greece, specifically, things are, are more spontaneous, spontaneously. People move, they react than plan. So, this was the way of doing business for many, many years. But Greece had a big lesson, through this official sector bankruptcy in the 2010. And this is a lesson, this made doing business very hard. 2015, we had the capital controls, which made business even harder. We had big bankruptcies because, as I said before, people didn't understand the balance sheet. They couldn't understand P&L and how this corresponds to balance sheet and liquidity. So many companies were big conglomerates and huge companies that nobody would guess that will go bust went, actually. So this was a big lesson. It was a very hard situation, to experience. More than 10 years of hard financial situation, but eventually there was a big lesson, So you saw many mistakes and what how a bad decision could affect the business, and gave you a sign that you have to be prepared for the unexpected, which is a major lesson for operating Greece. You have to be prepared for the unexpected because everybody gets prepared for the expected. but nobody can prepare for the totally unknown situation, something that goes crazy. But you have always, be a step ahead and be prepared for unexpected. So you have to have secured the committed lines. You have to have, an optional working capital. You have to be profitable. You have to have a plan B, a plan C. So this was a major lesson for all through these years in Greece. And eventually, after all these lessons, corporates understood that they have to, to elevate some of the processes like Treasury. So Treasury, I believe nowadays in Greece, has a pivotal role in business. And also, it's not moves from operational side to advisory. So, you can show them how much a business can expand, with resources, own resources. You can estimate how debt you can accumulate. How much is the ceiling of the debt that before it started destroying value, or how this debt accumulation will change the risk profile of your company, and what will it mean for the third parties. So all this, it's a scenery that Treasury has, the star role, in my opinion, nowadays, because he understands markets and also has a global view around the business.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you're saying. It can also be, I think, or is more a question, is it also that if you're as a corporate treasury and you have secured a credit facility at your banks, it can also lead that there are opportunities in the market. For example, businesses which have not invested in setting up a treasury, which might be profitable in its core, but have some liquidity problems. I can also imagine that there might be some opportunities for doing M&A in that market.
Yes, definitely. And this after 2015, 2016, there's this, a big Eldorado in M&As in Greece. So major funds came in the beginning or in the end of the crisis, depending on where you see it from. Now they're harvesting the profits of, this decision. And now M&A activity is, going second, third layer. So middle companies. We already acquired as a company that was acquired in 2017. We also acquired 3 or 4 companies afterwards, small ones, to build a portfolio. So yes, definitely. And this trend is still happening in Greece, Business are consolidated, funds are buying traditional family companies, they transform it to a corporate, they make it more beautified, let's say, and they sell it to the next one. So yes, this is also a big learning, for professional Greece, because you learn how market is appreciating businesses, which is very fundamental. You see where a fund and the private equity finds value on your business. So, if you turn it bottom up, you drive your business more successfully and create more value by this.
Yeah. How is it like working with Greek banks? Are they innovative? Are they there to facilitate the growth of your business? Or do you need to look outside of Greece as well?
Well, unfortunately, during crisis, many of the foreign banks left the country due to country risk. So also Greek local banks became introvert. They have to digest a huge sum of bad debt and to recapitalize equity, own capital. So, there was a long introvert journey for them. So they were very reluctant about new credit, and they focus only to manage the old loans, the existing loans. So adding up the 2015 capital controls, it was a mess, It was like we were cut off time. We were in a different dimension. Nowadays, things are moving fast. COVID surprisingly gave a big benefit for Greek companies, also corporates and banks, because we hurried up and become digital in a very fast way out of a necessity. So many things became digital during this couple of years in COVID, from official sector to corporates and banking. And I think now that, when countries upgraded from rating agencies, I see there's more appetite for global banks to come, especially in the beginning only for liquidity. They are giving investment products for this time, but I think that eventually they're gonna get involved in more, financing business and corporates. Definitely is gonna be good for Greece.
So you see that coming back already?
Yeah, but in a very slow and precocious way, which is understandable.
Yeah, but like if you look at all the statistics and the data now, it's becoming quite an interesting market again.
Sure.
Now you also set up a big trade finance program within Delta Foods. Can you tell us a little bit about the benefits of trade finance program for corporate trading?
Sure. This also it's another problem that came from necessity because, when you have lack of financing, you have to go to your balance sheet and find all the slow moving things that you have to, all the slow moving components that you have to accelerate and create liquidity. So yeah, through these years, we went all across the items of the balance sheet, and we installed a few financial supply chain programs. Actually, to be frank, it takes two to tango. So banking sector was also saw this opportunity because it was kind of secured finance, secured against receivables, against inventories, So it was more easy for them to digest, through capital requirements for them. And it was better, this kind of secured financing was protecting the equity. Everybody was focused on this working capital finance. So yes, we made many working capital schemes from confidential factoring, normal factoring, non-recourse factoring, with recourse factoring. We made supplier finance. So yes, we activated many of the components that were dormant. But of course, then as everybody knows, this is a very expensive way to get finance. So then you have to balance it, the cost benefit. So you have to be very focused on the cost. And actually, you have to actively manage these products, So you cannot plug it and let it roll. You have to manage it and stop it, start, and always have, an eye on use it as a credit facility and not as a plug-in instrument that it's always on.
Yeah.
So this is the main outcome of this journey so far.
All right. And you also led several big syndicated bond deals. Can you tell us a little bit about what exactly it is and how does it help your company?
Yeah, well, syndication bond loans actually is a country-specific program. It's a syndicated bond that is not on the markets. It's only private. So the banks are the buyers of this product. And actually, it's a technical way to bypass and withholding tax, a flat fee actually of 0.15 from the government, which is, in big sums makes absolute sense to bypass it. So this is the way to raise money in big sums in Greece. And usually nobody wants to take all the risk by itself. So it's always syndicated. So you have to follow all the process of issuing a bond. Like, make a program and put covenants and finance 5-year plans, etc., everything. But it's totally private, not going public in any way. So this process is very challenging, especially in hard times, where nobody wants to finance, and they are obliged to refinance a loan. It's very technical. It has a lot of legalities inside. They have covenants. So, you have to be very careful because a small detail can, bind your business for the next 5 to 10 years. And it's difficult to alter, especially when it's syndicated. Besides that, it's very technical legal, as I said, and needs a lot of, legal involvement and financial planning. So it's a very inexpensive also process.
Yeah, so it's also quite tailored, it sounds, and takes quite a long time to set it up specifically for your company.
Sure. And you have to negotiate with everybody.
All right.
Which is, when it's multi-party negotiation, it has to be 100% always on board. So, maybe even if you have 4 banks and one bank, every bank has different dispute every time, it's a mess, you're going to take months to end it. But for sure, it's like a process of issuing in a bond in the market. So as a professional, it's very, very interesting and very challenging. And understanding, you get involved inside you get deep into the business. You understand what other people see, what the people that put money see in your company. You understand what the challenges are. It's a great, journey for understanding your business, actually.
You also implemented or were closely involved in the implementation of a treasury management system and an ERP. Why did you decide to implement a TMS and not use, for example, a bank aggregation tool, which is also offered in Greece, if I'm not mistaken?
True. First of all, I will say about the need. The need is that we have a complex setup of small subsidiaries, and with which we don't have centralized treasury. So, each company it's totally decentralized. So getting the data from each accounting department every month was a pain, really a pain. And it was also pain for the people because they had, normal day-to-day accounting jobs, and suddenly, you have a parent company that's asking numbers every month, and it's not only P&L, it's, asking about debt, interest, liquidity, etc. So this was our necessity. Going to a TMS and not to aggregator, a bank aggregator, first of all, it was a strategic decision because we don't want to go or to pass all our liquidity from a single bank. So this was a strategic decision because liquidity and the allocation of cash, it's our business, it's nobody else's business. So this was number one. Plus TMS was a platform to upscale and include debt inside and automate some of the processes like, interest rate forecasts, to have in one place all the repayment plans and the maturities, and make some simulation on this. And last is a platform, to upscale and go introduce cash forecasting inside and risk management. So as a strategic point of view, all this, you couldn't count on a simple solution just to have cash visibility, and you should put something in place that can excel you in the near future.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting. You say Delta Foods is quite decentralized, and also the treasury activities are taking place not always within central treasury. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose that setup?
The setup comes from a necessity when you acquire standalone businesses. You're trying to formalize, the process, the accounting process, etc. So, treasury is not always a priority to centralize treasury. So gradually, you cannot wait until everything, comes with a normal course of time and get centralized everything. So you have to have visibility. And talking about visibility, you have to have debt visibility and liquidity visibility. You have to know which are the banks that holding your liquidity, so you can make a relationship management through this. So yes, this was the solution to take day-to-day effort from the subsidiaries and not transfer it to the parent company. So TMS was no-brainer. Centralized or not depends on many different. It's a business decision actually, and comes depends on the equity structure. For example, we have company that it's 70-30. We have the 70% and there's a 30% minority. You cannot decentralize this company.
And how do you deal with, because treasury is quite a specialization or requires quite specific skills, how do you ensure that all of those subsidiaries have that knowledge in-house, or can they reach out to your team?
Actually, you leave the day-to-day process on the subsidiary level and you take all the strategic decision on parent level. For example, first thing we acquired, when we acquired these businesses, we took the relationship on the parent company or the bank relationship. Second step, we made the restructuring of the biggest company. We restructured the loans and was a parent company activity, not a subsidiary activity. So through strategic initiatives, we have the high level control, and we also enforced all the subsidiary companies to have a 13-week rolling forecast cash flow. So in this way, we gain visibility for the next, 2 to 3 months, which is very important for us. So we manage intercompany loans and, through this visibility.
Yeah. Okay. Cash flow forecasting is, one of my passions, of course, which we work on ourselves quite intensively.
Makes sense.
Can you tell a little bit more about the production of this forecast? You described already that it takes place within the subsidiary itself. And is it then like being submitted in the TMS? Is that how I should see it?
Not yet in the TMS, but the plan is to concentrate everything on the TMS. So, planning after, experimenting with many different setups and processes, we came to this conclusion that having a 13-week rolling cash flow is the best tool to have. Due to the fact that we operate in a fast-moving consumer goods environment, there are many components that you have to consider always. For example, collecting cash from customers is never what you see because there are a lot of rebates on it. And rebates occur not on a pattern. So you have to have information updated every week and incorporate it in your cash flow. There is a lot of CapEx activity included. So you have to, always CapEx projects do not evolve in a linear manner. So you have, to be always ready to make a big installment in a vendor for a new machine or, make a big marketing campaign. So everything's correlated and you have to be updated on a weekly basis. So we decided that this is the best tool to concentrate and have visibility of the near future. But since also we are a fast-moving company, especially the parent company, which the numbers matter, we have a rolling monthly cash flow. So there we go more based on trends, because fast-moving business is kind of stable. You see a deviation of 3-4%, you don't see major shifts in your top line. The only change is, how you treat vendors and working capital in the payable side with CapEx. So, but nevertheless, the big picture goes with a 12-month rolling. So all this connected with a budget, which is indirect, but we do direct. So in Treasury, we do 13-week cash flow. On top, there's a rolling 12-month cash flow. Both of them are direct cash flows. And then we interconnect this with the budget cash flow, which is indirect. But, the basic component, we can identify the basic component in these two methods, and we can see the variances and take actions on this.
All right. How predictable is cash flow within your business? Is it something that you see clear seasonality across the different subsidiaries, or is it hard to predict?
There is seasonality, but when you are in a very strict plan that you have to deliver EBITDA based on the budget, you have to be very precise because timing is critical. So there is a lot of seasonality, but from the other hand, there are a lot of components, as I told you before, that it's unpredictable. So you don't know where the marketing is going to happen. So maybe it happened on March or on May. So you have to be, always updating your plans accordingly. You don't know, maybe there are trade marketing, with huge amounts that give discounts to the customers of the retailers. So this, it's moving like every 10 days, this changes. So you have to be aware of everything and be up to date in many, many aspects of the business.
Yeah. And I know a lot of companies are struggling to get the accuracy right. So how far is the forecast off from the actuals once they happen?
We have a benchmark where we see a great accuracy for the 1 to 2 months, but the third month we have big deviations. But this is, an ongoing process. So we are trying to forecast. But, making a forecast in a fast-moving business for the third month means that you have to forecast the sales for the 2 months ahead. So, it's always a challenge,
Yeah, that can be really difficult. All right. Well, let's talk about AI, one of the big themes in corporate treasury, alongside stablecoins, I think, but we will get to that a little bit later. Do you see any use cases for AI in corporate treasury processes?
Yeah, AI is a game changer and the use case is going to be everywhere. I mean, it's altering in a wide aspect, it's changing the way we communicate, conduct business, everything, every aspect. So inevitably, Treasury will be affected too in this AI. The only problem, as every, new hype, is that people get excited and they want to implement AI. So, implementing AI is like putting AI to chaos. So people, businesses, and professionals and treasurers ultimately have to understand that, AI, it's just, it's the end of a journey and not the start of a journey. Meaning that you have to digitize first. Before digitizing, you have to simplify. And before simplifying, you have to have accurate data. I mean, so nobody can go to the AI if he doesn't have the first layer, which is accurate data. Second layer, to have it simplified so, people can understand it and you can make quick decisions and not spend weeks on understanding your numbers. Then digitize it. And then since everything is in place, you can put AI to make, quick and fast decisions, but without all the previous steps. It's like, digitizing cows, putting a bomb inside your foundations. This is my point of view.
Yeah, fully agree with that statement. Yeah, I think that the data foundation is the most important. And then once you have that right, you can put AI functionality on top. But I think it's important to give it certain guardrails. I still see quite some treasurers trying to just throw their data into an LLM, like ChatGPT or Cloud, and saying, hey, make me a forecast. That's not going to work. It's not auditable. It's not repeatable, exactly the same. It doesn't combine data from different sources that well. So I think there's still a lot to win there in getting that process right of the interaction between the Treasury team with the AI. But I definitely see the potential as well.
Definitely potential. I totally agree with you. There's huge potential. Of course, you cannot eliminate the human judgment, from this process. Human experience and human judgment is gonna always be needed because somebody has to take the final decision, have to make a well-educated final decision. So CEO could never take a decision from an AI support regarding capital structure because he doesn't have the skills to evaluate this. It's a totally corporate technical issue and somebody has to have this element. And always, many people, opportunity given, I would like to state this, that many people see this AI and automation and general digitization as a way to eliminate, headcounts, which it's clearly a wrong, path to walk. Since, you don't need to eliminate the headcount, you have to drive resources to more valuable things,
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like when I was in corporate treasury, I spent sometimes like hours grinding on finding a difference between, hey, why is this forecast different from the actuals? Like, where is this difference coming from? Like making these kind of analyses, and that kind of comparison, if I look back, like if I were to have an AI that could immediately say, hey, this is where it is, I could have spent my time much more valuable in really understanding the different drivers and why is it like that and how can we do it better. So I think the role will be shifting, but not necessarily the need to reduce the headcount. I think the treasurers can focus on much more value-adding tasks.
It's happy to hear from you, since you have this exposure, and you can affect people that, this is a good message that you are spreading, that technology is not about trimming jobs. Technology is about elevating your business and drive value through this.
And since you also lead a treasury team, can you tell us a little bit about what you're looking for if you were to hire like people? Like what kind of people, what kind of skills do you think that the treasurer or the junior people coming into treasury should master to advance their career in treasury and become successful? Is it still the same as years ago, or you think they can benefit from a different kind of profile?
This is a very interesting question. First of all, it couldn't be same as 10 years ago because circumstances are totally different than 10 years ago. But nevertheless, I think one thing that stays there permanently is I want a person to be genuinely interested and curious about things. So in order to, to understand cash and liquidity is the blood of an organization. So, this goes through all the parts of an organization, goes through all organizations. So you have to understand, the business, and it's opportunity. You have to be curious to understand how this organization works and how the business model is and what are the drivers behind the model. Because otherwise, if you will not understand this, you'd just be, pressing buttons, and you can be a very good expert in, managing, solving trapped cash in, in a intermediary bank. But besides that, you cannot go further. So I would definitely choose people who are curious by nature and they want to understand the business.
Yeah, so it's more about the mindset.
Yeah, because technical things, if, average people and smart people, they're everywhere. So, you can build technicality.
Yeah, we see that as well. Like, I think the world is also changing so fast. And if you have that mindset of trying to figure out things, trying to learn things by yourself, understanding the world around you, it really helps also adapting faster in an environment which is rapidly changing. So those hard treasury skills alone will not get you there anymore.
Yeah, sure. Besides that, treasury has to be tech savvy for sure. Everything's technological anyway. So you have to be tech savvy, of course, and you have to have, solid education to understand, technical things like, time value of money and, the effect on interest, all this stuff, you cannot skip it, of course. But besides that, you have to be tech savvy and genuinely curious. Yes, for sure.
Good statement. Well, that brings us to one of your passions, I think, which is blockchain and stablecoins. Well, I have been curious in blockchain as well for many years, and also have been doing a lot of stuff in DeFi and stablecoins, having it as a store of value and storing it in a DeFi protocol, for example. What I can notice myself is that since about a year, there's an increased interest from corporate treasury in stablecoins. I think it's mainly driven by, developments in the US and also in Europe, seeing legislation being put into place and governments providing more clarity on what you can do and what you cannot do, thereby triggering additional interest from banks, from fintechs, and as a result also from corporate treasury teams who are getting increasingly curious on what you can do and what they should know today and what they should learn about it. Can you give us your perspective? Where do you see the biggest potential for using stablecoins for corporate treasury teams?
Well, in my opinion, I totally agree with your introduction. And plus, as you said, you have a deep experience on, all this DeFi world and how, things working on the digital side of the economy, on decentralized finance also. And this is the main contribution of this blockchain technology, in my understanding, is that it made people wonder, rethink how, this financial world is built, how it's structured, and what, the friction in this system, in the financial world, and how costs are, there are hidden costs in every step of this, doing business through the finance structure. And definitely this stablecoin, this technology, is giving a way out of this huge financial cost. I mean, there are trillions of euros, bounded in this financial system because they have to verify transactions with each other, and they have to build trust, and trust, it's very expensive, apparently, in a financial cost. So it's a great breakthrough, this blockchain and eventually the stablecoins that give you a way out of this super expensive system of proof, which is everybody's profitable, making money through this, but it's very slow. And I think it's a great opportunity for the finance world, because there's some money, these funds, if they can be released and allocated to more profitable and meaningful processes.
Yeah, for sure. Like I think when making, especially a cross-border payment,
yeah, definitely,
it can get now so expensive. Especially for smaller amounts, like the relative percentage you pay on fees through the traditional system is quite high. Of course, we already have like the Revoluts and the Wise of this world offering better rates, also for currency conversion. But still, there's quite a margin. Even they apply, and I think the technology, stablecoins, like if I want to send you a payment, yeah, it can be done at a fraction of a cent, which is the cheapest I think there is. I see a lot of potential as well there, but it's might be a matter of infrastructure as well at the end of the day. How do you look towards, because for you and me, it's easy. We can go into the app store, we can create a digital wallet, deposit some money, and I can send you some dollars, a solid euro stablecoin as well. I can send it to you, but there are operational risks. Like, for example, I can lose access to my wallet if it's directly on the blockchain. How do you see the challenge for corporates working with this? Because if I'm making payment at my bank, I can always call my banker saying, hey, I lost my password or I can't get in anymore. How do you see these challenges which corporates might have, or the worries that they might have in adopting?
You are totally right. Getting from a corporate perspective, get inside this ecosystem, there are many questions and many problems to be addressed. And frankly, I don't believe that a single corporate can manage all this. So, I mean, there are difficulties even when you have to, for ramp on and ramp off of this ecosystem. There is counterparty risk, there is money AML, there is everything. You have to consider many things. And I don't have that, there's a corporate that have this capability to allocate so many resources on managing all these aspects. I think the answer to all this, it's scalability, as you know, is a major problem for blockchain, as you better know than me. And adoption. If this is going to be adopted, the aim should not be for a corporate treasury to understand the technology behind. The aim should be that a corporate treasurer should ignore all this. This should be an infrastructure as it is now. Not many people understand how clearinghouses work and how Swift messages work and, how the international transfers are happening, right? But, you take it as granted and you operate on this. I mean, so the thing that a corporate treasurer should understand, he should understand that, you can't, there is a way to challenge the system and you have to demand for lower costs. So adaptation should be on the, on the banking sector and the government sector. They should Swift. I think they are kind of, they are water testing now. Even Greek banks are water testing these options now. They understood that only adoption, is the only way to, and mass adoption is the only way to make it happen, because otherwise adapting in silos will never work. I mean, we can, as two businesses, we can set up a highway transferring money in a cheap way, but at the end, it's going to be only you and me,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need an ecosystem at the end of the day.
So, but I mean, the target should be that corporate treasurers should understand that there's alternatives there, very cheap, very reliable, and eventually, all the ecosystems should go digital and take all this friction of trillions locked up in the national payment process.
Yeah. What kind of role do you think banks should play here? Because they're making quite a lot of money now on the traditional payment system. Like that's, where they're getting a lot of fees from. So they have quite a tough choice to make. Like either are they going to invest in setting up?
There's a great example, and the bank should get, inspiration from this. It's like the tobacco industry introduced the vaping technology. So, you don't have to wait until something kills your business. You can kill it yourself in your own terms, and adapt the new technology. So, I mean, the tobacco industry, it's, thriving. In the 90s, everybody said it was doomed, it was causing harm to people and bad for health. And all the tobacco business were trying to find alternatives, they buy beers and ketchups and whatever to diverse their source of revenue. And now, they decide to kill their own business and build a new one on top. So I think this is a paradigm for banking sector also. They have to embrace this challenge, and build the new ecosystem on top of this and be the owners of the ecosystem. instead of being challenged by it.
Yeah, I fully agree with you there. I think you can, as a bank, you can wait and see what happens, and then you will be late to the party, or you can go as one of the first, supporting your corporates with the infrastructure to make the payments in a cheaper and faster way. But I think banks are still quite hesitant to be among the first movers. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
And as I told you, you have to be, at the end of the day, the average corporate treasurer should ignore all this, the technology underneath. They should take only the benefit.
On the front end, nothing should really, I want to pay this company, it should work the same. Only under the hood, like there's more efficient ways to do it. How do you look towards the counterparty risk concerns that corporate treasuries might have? We have, quite big stablecoin issuers. You have Circle in the US, USDC. Tether, of course, USDT are now the main players. We see left and right new stablecoin issuers popping up. How can corporate treasurers deal with that? Like one of the examples I've heard from corporate treasury teams that want to dip their toes into this water, try it out, saying, well, then we receive stablecoins and we immediately convert it back to real dollars. How can corporate treasuries go about this, managing this new type of risk as if they already didn't have enough risk?
That's another reason why, adoption need to take place, and why the traditional financial systems should embrace all this stuff. Because at corporate level, you don't have, the capacity to, manage all this third party. It's, uncharted waters. You have to get too much technical, and at the end of the day, the simple, decision would be not touch. So actually, when you have to manage risk, you have 4 options, right? You have to digest it, you have to minimize the risk, you have to allocate it, transfer the risk to give it to somebody else, or you have to avoid it. So I think when it's something so complicated, I think most of the corporate treasurer would avoid the process. So that's why you need to, take it from the traditional finance system, because they know how to manage risk, they know how to, they know your customer processes, they know AML, they are expert. And that's the point of this financial system, They exist because they get economies of scales for doing things like this, and they're minimizing costs. Otherwise, they have a couple of missions. The mission is this, to minimize the cost of counterparty risk and the AML, all this, and allocate money sufficiently. So, it's the basic mission of the banking sector. So they should pick up too, also this thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it might very well be that this whole ramping up of stablecoin payments will still, because individuals have a much bigger risk appetite. They might think, what is the chance that the stablecoin issuer will go out of business? And then it becomes so popular. I can see it only then corporates and banks might say, well, this is no longer something we can avoid. We need to take this really serious and start supporting it as well, and start being able to accept crypto payments, stablecoin payments as an alternative payment method. So if I were to take
Sure, the retail, I got to fully agree. And if you take a step further, you're going to see that, this continental Europe, United States, they have a totally different approach. While US as a developing nation, is leaving entrepreneurs do the job. So, they say, since it's US denominated, I don't care, you issue the stable coins, other people take the risk. But Europe drives from the more traditional, and the safe place. So say, I will do the infrastructure, I will make the infrastructure, I will issue, everything. I will be the owner of, the infrastructure for this retail innovation. And it's very interesting, that because at some point, these two different approaches, they have to merge at some point. So it's very interesting what's going to be at the end.
Yeah, for usability indeed. Well, there even need to be ways of exchanging on-chain euro stablecoins for dollar stablecoins if we want to make it really usable.
And also it's going to be, official stablecoin versus private stablecoin. It's going to be very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, curious to see how that will play out. Nico, before we round off this podcast, I want to ask you a final thing. Like, we have a new tradition on this podcast. It's called the one thing. If I were to give you 1 minute for you to share the one thing, the one piece of advice you would give corporate treasurers listening on how they can make the most impact, what would be your one thing, given everything we discussed?
Well, I would urge all the corporate treasurers to stop looking, on the day-to-day. They are in the pivotal position of a company. They are on the top of the hill and they have overview of many aspects of the business. So they who should step up and transform their role from operational to strategic, because not for themselves, but for the business sake, because they only give value to the system and they should do it. Don't hesitate.
All right. Wise words. Thank you, Nico.